Welcome to Jared Scott Outdoors. This YouTube channel is dedicated to getting our youth more involved in the outdoors. To do this, I'll be out with family and friends doing all sorts of outdoor adventures. This week on Jared Scott Outdoors, we are heading out after pronghorn. I've got Kade, we've got Nathan. Both of these guys are first-time big game hunters, and somehow they beat the odds and drew pronghorn tags. So this is kind of a special deal. We're really excited as fathers to come out and bring these kids out here and hopefully see if we can get some good goats. So we've got some, are you guys excited?
Yeah.
Yeah? All right, big goats?
Yeah.
Hopefully?
Yes, hopefully.
All right, we'll see if we do some passing on the little guys or if they're just too anxious to get their first big game animal down or not. But anyways, let's get after it. So pronghorn hunting is totally different than most big game hunting. It's a bit more relaxed, less hiking for sure, and there's usually a lot of driving around spotting antelope. We'll start the show off with Kade as we headed out a week or so after the opener, after many other hunters had already tagged out, and it was a little bit quieter out in the mountains. So as we were driving around the first area we wanted to check, we drove up and spotted a nice buck with a doe ahead of us. We quickly backed up out of sight and then snuck back in to get a better look at them. Well, it turned out that they'd spooked because of us and were constantly on the move, which made it tough to catch up to them to get a better look. Well, I was actually quite surprised at the quality of this buck. It had very impressive cutters that were much better than average. The overall length was hard to judge quickly because it curled so much. With the big cutters and the deep curls, it was probably a shooter buck, but by the time we really judged it well, it was out of range. At first, it was just 200 yards off. But by now, when we realized how nice it was well over 400 yards out and didn't stop till they were out of sight.
Well, that was a nice buck. He got it spooked as we just came over a hill, but sad we missed it.
That was a really nice buck. We just didn't have enough time to really look it over. You know, you come over a hill, there it is, we backed off. They were still just a little antsy. We grabbed our spotting scope and ran over and, you know, just had time to get it up. And had we known it was a good buck, we could have maybe got a shot right off the bat when we first found him again. But we didn't know, you know, and when you're working on a tag that he might not get for another 15 or 20 years, you don't want to just shoot anything. After filming it and watching it for a while, now we're thinking, that might have been as good as we're ever going to see. A really nice buck there, but we just didn't have time. Just didn't, you know, have time to really look it over and have a good look and judge it and see. You know, antelope, you're talking about 1, 2, 3 inches that makes the difference between a 12-inch goat and a 15-inch goat, which is a big difference, you know, just on the quality of that buck. So we're going to try to play it smart and have some time, but we just didn't have time on that one. Today just wasn't going as planned. Typically you want to see the pronghorn a mile or so off. Then you get out the spotting scope, check them out, and see if there's a buck worth going after. If so, then you make a game plan and see if you can sneak into range. Well, the next buck we saw was once again right out in front of us when we came around a corner and took off running. Checking it out, it was also a really nice buck. It didn't curl in as much as that last one, but it was wider and taller. We watched it for a bit as it just kept on going and going, even though it was now a long ways away from us. Well, that was another nice buck. The only problem was we were driving over a hump, and suddenly there it is right in front of us and running already, and it never did stop. So it's by itself. It doesn't have any does. I don't really see that it's got a reason to stop, and so it's hard to say where it's going to be, you know, in the end. So instead of trying to find it again, we're just going to check out new spots, see what we can find. We're in a new area now after seeing those couple nice bucks. We've done a little more driving. We've seen a lot of does and distant animals, small buck. We're in a spot, we've got this hill behind us that the other side of, in the past, has held antelope when I've come here with other, you know, with other friends and stuff. So we're just going to park it. And we're going to go for probably an hour or 2 hour hike, just looking and glassing. This way we could be a little more careful. If there are some goats in there, we're not going to spook them by driving, you know, right through it, kind of a deal. See what happens. What do you think? You'll notice that the weather was pretty sketchy looking today, and I'm sure all of you are aware of how many early winter storms we had roll through this fall. Today was no exception. Typically, when you think of pronghorn hunting, you picture warmer situations. What we didn't realize was that the storms brewing off in the distance were working our way. As we got to the top of this knoll, we could see the storm on the other side of the valley as a wall coming right towards us. We figured we had plenty of time as it was still a few miles off. Glassing, we gotta be really careful here. Just glassing so we don't get caught before. We were careful to glass the area below us and then sneak in closer and glass again. We just kept working around the rim as we glassed it all up. As I mentioned, this has been pretty good in the past, so I was disappointed not to find anything at first. Then I spotted 2 goats, and at least one was a buck. Crawling over to some rocks to use as cover, we got to the edge and sat down to pull out the scope to see what they were. That's about the time I realized that the storm cell we'd seen off in the distance was much closer than I'd realized, and it was seconds away from hitting us. When it did, it was a wall of wind with snow flurries at first, and then an all-out whiteout. All right, that was horrible timing. We got up to the top, we saw two animals. I could tell one was a buck that was bedded down. We snuck in, and then the snow came. I was able to hurry and get the spotting scope out just in time to tell they were both bucks, but then the wind that comes with those little cells, picked up and was blowing in the snow, and it just turned into a whiteout, so I couldn't even tell if they were bucks worth waiting for. We were only about a third of a mile away from the truck, so we figured, this might last an hour or two. It might be 15 minutes, but we decided to come back and weather this out in the truck. So we'll give it some time, and if it clears, we'll head back up and see what's going on up there. Any comments?
It was horrible.
It was only about a half-hour wait at the most, and then at least for the moment, it quit snowing. All right, we're gonna give this one more try. It has now quit. It didn't last too long actually, but it did coat about a 1/4 inch on the ground everywhere. Got our packs pretty well coated with snow and wet, so it's a little clear. We could definitely get hit again anytime, but we're gonna get back up there and see what we got. We hiked back up to the same area, keeping a sharp eye out for any pronghorn we hadn't noticed earlier. When we got to the point we could see where those bucks had been earlier, we spotted one buck up and feeding away from us, while the other one was totally out of sight. The wind was still blowing hard enough to make it tough to film, but we could still tell that the one buck we could see wasn't what we were looking for. But maybe the other buck that was now out of sight would be bigger. Well, we dipped out of sight and moved in closer in order to find that other buck. As we came back up to where we thought we might see them, sure enough, there they both were. But they were both looking at us, and there was a dozen elk looking at us. Elk were definitely not what we had expected to see here. As you would guess, the elk took off. We were equally surprised to see a pretty nice bull among the herd. We watched the elk for a bit and then glanced back at those 2 pronghorn bucks that hadn't moved much. I had already noticed that neither one was as big as we were hoping to find, but we checked them out again anyhow. While watching them, it suddenly dawned on me that earlier I had heard a grunt to our right. Looking that way, I was surprised to see a very big antelope buck staring hard at us, and it was less than 200 yards off. It must have been bedded up below us as we walked right past it, and then it spotted us when all those elk ran off. Either way, I tried to get Kade on it, but the gun was in the pack and the buck was already on its way out of there. Once it was out of sight, we grabbed our gear and took off running. There was no time to waste. Basically, we got back up on the ridge so the buck couldn't see us. And then we hurried about a 1/4 mile ahead and went back to the edge of the ridge where we expected we could see the buck somewhere. As we looked around, suddenly there it was right below us at 300 yards. That was in range, but we still needed to get Kade set up and settled in for a shot. As Kade worked on getting set, the buck just kind of kept a pretty constant pace, leaving. It just didn't stop. So even if Kade could get solid on it, at this distance and it continually walking, made the shot very iffy. By now the buck was out to 400 yards, which Kade had practiced, but it still wasn't staying still. And before we knew it, it was out to 500 yards and still moving. We sat there watching it as it continued in that direction till it was probably near 800 yards. I couldn't figure a game plan because it was so wide open. As I looked and looked, I finally realized a route that we could take that would get us back out of sight and give us a possible high spot we could get to. With that, we hurried to put the game plan into effect. Dropping out of sight while the buck wasn't looking our direction, we once again hurried forward. We had about 600 yards to cover as quickly as we could, and since the buck wasn't stopping much, we had to keep moving. Our high spot really barely qualified as a high spot, but it was slightly higher than where we'd last seen it, and it was really our only shot. As we slowly got to that high spot, we looked in the direction we hoped it would be in and didn't see it at first. Then suddenly we saw motion to our left about 90 degrees from where we thought it would be. And sure enough, there it was, still on the move. This buck was making it really hard.
The seconds are the first circle, but then you'll want to be up a little higher than middle. He's going to come out in that clearing. He's going to come out in that grass. You're going to have to tell me if you're solid on it.
It was still only 300 yards off though, so in range. The only problem was that Kade couldn't see it well with all that sagebrush. And as before, the buck just wouldn't hold still.
But you tell me if you're solid enough.
It was heading toward a clearing, so hopefully that would allow Kade that open shot we'd hoped for. When it did, Kade still had to be so high on the shooting sticks that he was having a hard time getting solid. When I asked him how he felt, he said he was still a bit shaky. Not wanting to risk a shot if he wasn't dead set, I waited for him to feel ready. However, then it skylined itself, making the shot even worse.
It's only if you feel solid. I don't know what you're feeling. If you feel like you're wiggling all over, then no. Well, and he's skylined right now.
Now this was frustrating. We were so close so many times, but once again had to hold off and let it walk away, hoping we'd have another opportunity.
But as soon as he goes over, we're moving.
As soon as it did disappear, we grabbed our stuff again and hurried about 400 more yards to where it had disappeared. This time we found ourselves on top of a high spot with it having dropped down below us. Sure enough, it suddenly appeared coming out of the bottom. I ranged it at just about 300 yards, and this time it was just feeding. This was our chance. We threw our packs on top of each other for him to rest the gun on, which unfortunately caught the eye of the buck. It stared us down for 5 minutes solid without even moving, and of course we froze. Finally, when it took its eyes off us, Kade laid down and settled in on the buck. It was a little spooked still and started walking again. When it stopped, that was Kade's time. It was standing at about 330 yards, which meant he needed to aim the 300-yard dot a little high. We had practiced enough that he knew what he needed to do. He just had to settle in for a good shot.
Put another one in, put another one in. There you go.
What you just heard was a misfire. I couldn't believe it. What were the odds? By the time he was ready again, the buck was on the move. This was not looking good. If it would just stop again and give him another chance.
Oh, that was safety. Okay, there you are. It just depends. If you're good, then just go right on that white line. Right there. You got him!
Yes!
Put another one in. Put another one in.
Yes!
Oh my gosh, Kade. You drilled it.
Yes!
Kade! Are you kidding me? You just drilled that thing!
Yes!
He did have to put one more shot in it to put it down for good, but I was still way impressed with his composure through the whole thing.
High five, buddy. Awesome.
That's pretty crazy. What do you think, Kade? You just think, no way, you know, it's not going to work out. It's a beautiful buck. We're not going to get in on it because just crap happens. It seems like. But Kade made it happen. That was awesome. So let's go check this thing out. Kade, you did it, man!
I did it! First time.
I think it's smaller than all of them. As we walked to it, I was teasing Kade a bit about how the buck was actually smaller than I thought. I knew full well, however, that it was a pretty buck. I wasn't totally sure how big it was, but I knew it was for sure the kind we were looking for. This was Kade's first big game hunt, and so of course, his first shot at a big game animal. Needless to say, he was pretty stinking excited.
He's just a little dude, Kade. Look at that little thing. Kade, that's a monster! Go! Look at that thing. Go! Look at that thing. Are you excited?
Yes.
Well, we're getting some more sleet and hail starting to hit us. It's just all white. Looks like we might get hit again, but that's all right. Kade got his goat down, and this buck is impressive. Wow. I knew it was big when we first got a good look at it. I didn't know how big, I think. Either that or I'm imagining, but usually animals get smaller. This one got bigger. As you can see, this is a beautiful buck right here. Just nice and tall. This is a trophy. We're getting snowed on right now. The lens is getting covered as we speak. And but he's got his buck down. He's got this big one down. It never ceases to amaze me. Just when you think things aren't going the way you want and the big one's getting away, a 10-year-old punk puts it down. What do you think of this hunt, Kade?
It was fun. It was a nice, easy first hunt.
Yeah, that was an easy first hunt. He's been out with us archery elk hunting, so he knows what tough can be. And this was definitely just a fun, much more relaxed kind of easy hunt. And it paid off for him. So that's one pronghorn down. I've still got another, I've got another friend with another young kid that's gonna hunt, so we're gonna go ahead and finish it off with his hunt. As Kade pulled out his tag and started notching it for this over 16-inch buck, the snow came down in blankets. In literally just minutes, the buck was totally covered in snow. While it did make things a little more complicated, at least it cooled the meat down. Well, as I put this together, I realize I'm out of time, so we'll wrap up the youth pronghorn hunt with another great buck next week. These episodes can't be done without your help. You know the drill. Please make some comments, like, and subscribe, and I'll keep working on more videos.